I want to cover this very quickly because people, the CDC abruptly changed its guidance on face masks last week. Masks have become a political statement as much as an epidemic necessity. Yes, that's true. In an unexpected announcement on May 13th, the CDC guidance that all people should wear masks when in enclosed public spaces has changed. And what is that guidance? The CDC now says that 2 weeks after completing a full people no longer need to wear masks indoors if you're vaccinated. That's the new guidance. But weird, the governor of California is not following that guidance. And I tweeted that out. I said the governor of California is not following the science on CDC. I thought only red states thumb their nose at COVID science. Weird how none of this shitlibs are pillorying him for it. Again, you were for a year you weren't allowed to disagree with the CDC, but now you can do it. A University of San Francisco, California expert says California, San Francisco should immediately lift mask mandates for the vaccinated. That's somebody who was big pro mask wearer. She wrote 7 papers on why we should wear masks. Now this expert is saying we should lift it immediately. We should listen to the CDC. That's what they're saying. After the CDC announced Thursday that individuals fully vaccinated against no longer need to wear masks or practice physical distancing, Monica Gandhi, a leading COVID-19 expert, called on officials in California and San Francisco to ease the mask mandates to align with the new CDC guidelines. There is immense collateral damage that comes from not easing restrictions after most people are vaccinated. It sends a message that there's still a danger when there isn't one. And then schools remain closed and businesses suffer. Some collateral damage from restrictions needed to occur when we didn't have vaccines. But now that we have them, there's no justification. Gandhi cited the fact that California has one of the highest vaccination rates and lowest case rates in the country as evidence the state can loosen restrictions. Gandhi said the science conclusively supports the new guidance. The science conclusively supports the new guidance, and that fears over not being able to tell the vaccinated from the unvaccinated are largely mooted by the fact that the unvaccinated pose very little risk to the vaccinated. But there it is. CBS reports that the CDC's new guidelines, California is going to ignore them. They're not following the new guidelines. And so I said, I find it weird that for the past year, if you question the CDC guidelines for COVID or for any reason, you are immediately labeled an anti-science conspiracy theorist. Now it seems everybody gets to question the CDC guidelines without scorn. What has changed? So here's someone who follows me and who I actually happen to agree with, but it looks like we don't. He says erring on the side of caution is much less dickheady. Okay, but when exactly did you start thinking that it's okay to be anti-science and contradict the CDC COVID guidelines? Did you always think it was okay not to follow CDC COVID guidelines, or is this new for you? I'm getting it. That's the question. That's the question. Not should we follow the CDC or the CDC's wrong because of this or the nurses are against it. But when did this happen? And why are we okay with questioning it now? By the way, you can only question it in one direction. Do you think the CDC is strictly guided by science, or could they have another agenda, like normalizing deaths so the economy can get going again? I've never trusted them, by the way. And this guy, here's my friend again. He says, exactly. America, Britain, there clearly many other countries have few compunctions about there being a high spoilage of human lives in the pursuit of wealth, and none of us. Again, that's okay. That's okay. Here's the weird thing. This guy's in his bio. He put being a COVID denier sicko gets you an Insta block. So I just told him, so you just admit when it suits you, then you follow the CDC guidelines. And you even block those who don't follow the CDC guidelines. It says that in your profile, but when it doesn't suit you, you get to ignore the CDC and make up your own mind about science. So this is what I've been talking about. Why is it okay now for people to have questions about the CDC guidelines? And I think you should always be allowed to ask questions, by the way. I didn't go along with that. I think that was nuts that we weren't able to. You should always be able to question everything. Science is peer-reviewed. They question it. So, and now over to Max. I thought I had prepared a story today, a sketch about the CDC guidelines, because the new CDC guidelines are if you are vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask, even indoors, even around unvaccinated MFers. That's the CDC guidelines, and now a bunch of people are against it. The governor of California is not going to follow the CDC guidelines. And I think I just saw this, another governor, maybe New Jersey, I don't know, another governor I just saw as I was coming into the studio is not going to follow the CDC guidelines. And my whole thing is, I thought if you didn't follow CDC guidelines on COVID, that you got canceled because you were an anti-science conspiracy theorist. But apparently now, because Trump's not president, now you can question science again. People are saying, well, we're just being cautious. It's different to be cautious when you question the CDC's, because there's a lot of people who want to keep still wearing masks, even though the CDC says don't fucking wear masks. And so there's a lot of people who still, like the governor of California, wants us to keep wearing masks until June, like 15th or something. That's not following the science. So why is it okay now to not follow the science? And they go, oh, well, you're being extra cautious. No, what you're doing is being an anti-vaxxer, because what you're saying is that the vaccines don't work. Yeah, Rachel Maddow, I'm going to still keep wearing my mask. What? That sounds like anti-vax jargon. If you don't want to, that means you don't believe the vaccines work. Anyway, I thought I had that story prepared for today because I really wanted to go over it with Max.
Well,
but I didn't.
I mean,
go ahead.
Do you want to talk about that story?
Let's talk really quick. I don't have graphics and shit, and so it's not a real story. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, I never have graphics, so whatever. I just have like these same like books behind me. But I don't want to come off as anti-vax. I think people should be taking these shots. They're not really vaccines if they're in risk groups or if they want to. But these shots don't appear to be necessarily vaccines because they don't prevent transmission in all cases. That's why we saw Bill Maher have to cancel Real Time, because even after being vaccinated, he had what's known as a breakthrough case where he got COVID. It was asymptomatic. And I really want to take this moment to thank COVID-19 and whoever is responsible for making it, for shutting down Real Time with Bill Maher for a week. It was a real mitzvah to humanity. But, eight players for the New York Yankees have had breakthrough cases. They've tested positive on the COVID test after being vaccinated. This isn't to say that vaccines or the shots do not work. The tests so far show that they reduce your risk of hospitalization or extreme disease. And if you're over 70, if I was over 70, I'd definitely be, rushing out to get it. But I think this is influencing California's decision, and it's causing a lot of confusion because transmission is not totally prevented in all cases. And I did see, and maybe I'm wrong, and I'm open to being corrected, on the CDC's own site, they're going to stop counting breakthrough cases unless they lead to death or severe illness. But it's a real problem. I think they're afraid that these kind of stories will deter people from getting the COVID shots. But then you have all of these contradictions or disparities between the states. You have liberal California applying the mask mandate even against CDC recommendation that you can take off the mask if you're vaccinated. But Texas is just a complete free-for-all. And you can look at what's happening in stadiums in Texas, baseball stadiums. They're completely packed. People are just, having just like cheek to jowl next to each other. And cases are going down there, according to, I think, CDC data. Deaths are at an all-time low since the pandemic began. And they have, this right-wing Republican governor. I think cases are going down in Ron DeSantis's Florida. Ron DeSantis had an entire press conference with medical experts, and I might not agree with everything they said. I might or might not, but they were talking about how a mask mandate is completely worthless and questioning the quote unquote science. And that was removed from YouTube. But, the numbers don't totally add up. Michigan has had a very harsh lockdown under a Democratic governor, Gretchen Whitmer, but their numbers had gone up a month ago. And then the country with the most vaccinated people in the world, or people who took the shot in the world, Seychelles, where over 50% of the population has taken the shot, more than Israel, which, doesn't give the shot to Palestinians, but more than any other country in the world. And they have had one of the highest spikes in cases per capita in the world. So I just have a lot of questions here. And I have questions about why the CDC also isn't working towards finding a treatment protocol for COVID-19. There have been, there have been some breakthroughs there. Ivermectin is one thing I'm hearing about, but the CDC doesn't seem to be interested in that. They're only interested in pushing everyone to take these shots, and we're being bombarded with propaganda from people like even nighttime comedians like Jimmy Kimmel, who did a spot that was actually sponsored by Moderna. It actually says at the bottom, sponsored by Moderna, and Kimmel's pushing the Moderna vaccine. And then in a subsequent spot, Kimmel is mocking people who are hesitant to take it. Once again, I'm not saying don't take it, but there are a number of questions out there, and these kind of inconsistencies between California and the federal recommendations are creating a lot of confusion and questions in people, which leads to this culture of hyper coercion.
California had one of the strictest lockdowns in the country, and it didn't really there's no correlation between our COVID outbreak and the severity of your lockdown, like you're pointing out with Michigan. We ranked 29th for COVID deaths in the country, right, out of 50 states. So it's not, so again, I don't mind people, I don't mind the governor of California actually questioning the feds or the CDC, which they're doing now. I actually don't mind that. I don't mind people having a vigorous debate about how to handle this COVID pandemic. I like that. My point is, there wasn't one for a whole frickin' year. For a whole year, if you deviated even a scintilla from the official guidelines, you were immediately branded an anti-vax conspiracy theorist, and you were canceled. You were not allowed to. But now everybody's allowed. The nurses are questioning the CDC. Every jagoff on Twitter, hosts on MSNBC are questioning the CDC guy. Everybody, and they all have. And to me, that's good. You should be able to do that. But why weren't we able to do that for a whole year? And those same people who are fucking questioning the CDC guidelines now were the same people enforcing thought police over the CDC and the science around COVID for a year straight. That's my point.
It's a sure way to get censored is to question the quote unquote science.
But now everybody can, Max. So I'm asking, no one's getting censored now, and no one's getting scored. Now you can disagree with the CDC till the cows come home, and no one gets in trouble. Why?
Well, you can
changed?
Disagree in one direction. You can only disagree in the pro-lockdown, pro-mask direction, which seems to support a particular agenda. And you obviously can't question the agenda of big pharma, which is intertwined with the quote unquote, the quote unquote science. It's like, yeah, I believe in science, but it's because I believe in empiricism. I believe in facts. But when this entire initiative is being guided by people like Bill Gates, people are inclined to question it. Or when you have the former chairman of the Thomson Reuters Foundation, the charitable arm of the largest media organization in the world, on the board of Pfizer, or you have, late night comedians like Jimmy Kimmel on the take from Moderna, people are going to question it. And when people question it, whether they're right or wrong, they're being censored. They're just being wiped off YouTube. As I mentioned, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, who I think is like, in many cases, he's a wingnut. In many cases, he's doing voter suppression. I disagree with him on so many things, but he did a panel discussion questioning the consensus, and YouTube just erased it. There was no debate. There was no empiricism there. And I have to say, a lot of the lockdown skeptics that I know seem to be more interested in empiricism than mainstream liberals who just simply accept the quote unquote science. When we talk about the science, it's like talking about the foreign policy consensus. It's often conceived by people who have an agenda and are looking out for their bottom line. So that's why, like, at the Gray Zone, we're very careful when we talk about COVID-19, we talk about the pandemic, because we're already fighting a war on so many fronts.
That's right.
Like a political war, just to break through this wall of imperial media. And if you just question the quote unquote science, the consensus, the official consensus on this at all, that opens you up to actually being censored, and no one will defend you. So I think there should be a more open debate about this, but you can't debate in that direction.
No, but you can't. But the point you're making is you can now disagree with the CDC guidelines, but only in one direction.
Yeah.
You can.
It's really the lockdown that you can't question. And it's associated with right-wingers. It's associated with Trumpism. But at the Gray Zone, we actually have done some coverage of the lockdown that's questioned the prevailing consensus in the U.S. We did a piece from Colombia by Nash Landsman, who is a reporter who covers a lot of Latin American issues, on how the lockdown in Colombia, without any aid, people were getting nothing socially, was causing mass death, deprivation. People were bored, like literally forced in their homes, and they were hanging red flags out of their windows. This was, earlier on in 2020, to symbolize the suffering they were experiencing. And I believe strongly that this played a role in influencing the uprising we're seeing right now, because under austerity, neoliberal austerity conditions, when you put people under lockdown in a poor colonized country like Colombia, you're going to see massive suffering. And then we had Ben Norton in Managua. He lives in Managua. He was pushing back against U.S. mainstream media, corporate media like the Amazon-owned Washington Post, saying that Nicaragua's President Daniel Ortega had done nothing and was surrendering his country to mass death. And what Ortega was doing was actually catering to his own base, who are people who earn money in either as rural farmers or in the informal economy as street vendors, people working hand to mouth, living day to day, aren't earning salaries. That's like 50% of Nicaragua's population, and they can't afford to be put under lockdown and stuck at home. If they do so, they'll starve and die. And that for them is worse than getting COVID-19. And so Nicaragua took a much more flexible approach. They do wear masks inside, but outdoors there's no mask mandate, and people are pretty much living their lives in Nicaragua right now, and they're doing very well. Their numbers are very good. So it contradicts what we're being told here. And it raises the question about how continued endless lockdowns actually affect working class people, people who can't have these little stay at home Zoom jobs and just be on this and learn a new language and learn to paint while the pandemic is taking place. How does it affect them? Their voices aren't really listened to, nor are the voices of the prisoners in D.C. jail who have been under 23-hour lockdowns for months and have not been to trial. And they've been saying, we'd rather get COVID than continue to be tortured. This is a heinous human rights abuse. We only get to be out of our cells 1 hour a day. We saw a similar uprising in St. Louis at the jail there. And it just raises more questions about how long this will have to continue with everyone placed under the same harsh protocol. But I would also say, we're lucky we're in the United States, because I know it's a rare time you'll hear me say that, but it's much harsher in Europe. In the UK, for example, when people have gone out and protested, they've been hit with fire hoses in Brussels. They were beaten by police in Hyde Park in London, and they've been tear gassed just for gathering and protesting. And we haven't really seen that in the U.S.
Again, I just want to be clear. I'm all for robust debate at all times. My whole thing is, why weren't you allowed to ever debate anything about what the CDC guidelines were up until now? And again, as Max points out, you're only able to disagree in one direction. Otherwise, you'd be canceled. You'd get the video taken down. It's so funny. Why is it that the governor of California can disagree with the CDC guidelines, but you can't? Another governor can't in another way. Again, this idea of it's the thought police. So we have the Ministry of Truth, and there's a certain approved narrative about what's happening, and you can't stray from it. And if you do, you will be squashed. Except again, I'm flummoxed to go on Twitter and to watch all these people who are hyper. You cannot question the CDC guideline. How dare you? Now, completely questioning the CDC guidelines. And they point to the nurses. And I'm like, that's, again, I think that, by the way, nurses not a scientific organization. That they're a nurses union. That's not a scientific organization. I don't think they do their own testing. But anyway, they'll point to the teachers. What about students who want to go back to school? When do the kids get to go to school? I mean, I'll be called crazy for asking. My whole point is that I think we should have always been having these kind of robust debates. I welcome these robust debates. I welcome the governor of California being able to give his rationale for why he's not following the CDC science. I think that, and then everybody can debate it. And then he's up for election, and you get to hold him accountable for it. What I don't like is that it's only okay sometimes. Only when it's politically okay to disagree. You should be able to disagree all the time, and you should be able to, but now it's cool, super cool. And no one will admit that. Like the people who are opposing the CDC guidelines now won't admit that it's effed up, that for a complete year, you were not allowed to do that. And if you strayed and you were called a bad person and you're a conspiracy theorist and you were canceled and you're anti-science. But now all of a sudden overnight, because the CDC said something that they don't like, now it's okay to disagree with them. That is messed up. It should another question you can't ask is, why does the CDC guideline for being maskless indoors only apply to people who have taken the COVID-19 shot and not people who have the antibody who have previously had COVID-19. Right. Why do those people have to get a vaccine?
Get the shot when the shot itself doesn't prevent transmission in all cases? It definitely can, improve you in that capacity, but it's never talked about. There was this scare campaign that if you got it, you can get it twice, which goes against everything that I've learned about basic stuff about virology. But now it's like it doesn't even matter. I don't have an answer to that question, but these are questions that should be raised, and So I just want everybody who's questioning the CDC guidelines and their science now to stay like that forever. Right? I have a feeling there's still going to be only certain questions you can ask going forward, and certain questions you're not going to be. There's going to be. I was always brought up with there's no such thing as a stupid question, but holy shit, for the last year, you were not allowed to ask questions. You were not allowed. I was not allowed to ask any questions here at my show. They're going to take down my goddamn channels. You know that. I'm not allowed to ask any questions. So that's why, and me, that's what I like to do. I like to ask questions. I like to push back against the general consensus. I like to push back against the establishment narrative on things. That's the whole point of the show. What else would I be doing? Why would I be doing a show if I'm going to just parrot the establishment narrative? Then I'd be the Young Turks. I'm here, that the reason why I do this is because I want to push back against the establishment narrative. And why this is affecting me so much is because for a whole year I wasn't able to. I was not allowed to. Questioning the narrative or questioning the consensus of seemingly perpetual sort of semi-lockdown that destroyed small business, sent commercial real estate to hell and is leading to BlackRock buying up commercial real estate in a way they've never have before, and record profits for Amazon and graduation of wealth to the billionaire class in a way we haven't seen before. Questioning that is the most likely thing to get you removed from YouTube, to get you banned from Twitter, to get you demonetized, to get your Patreon account removed, as Whitney Webb's account was removed. And I'm not saying that I agree with everything she said or I'm endorsing what she said, but I don't see how it's so dangerous that her Patreon account had to be completely wiped out. But this isn't just about when people like you are targeted, Jimmy, or she's targeted. It's also for questioning other narratives. And then finally, their antagonists have an opening.
Yes.
This has created the opening, and this is like a beta test for much deeper, more comprehensive online censorship on a whole range of issues.
For instance, when Dr. Fauci came out at the beginning of the COVID pandemic and said, don't wear a mask, he said that. And he was lying when he said it, and he knew he was lying when he said it. Well, how do I know that? Because he's admitted it. And the reason why he lied and told people not to wear masks was because he was afraid they would go out and buy up all the masks and they wouldn't have enough masks for their hospital personnel. So it wasn't based on science. It was based on him worried that they didn't have enough supply. So they lied to you so that you would practice bad science and expose yourself to COVID so they could protect someone else. They were making those decisions and lying to you. You can't lie to people about public health. Why? Because now they won't ever believe you going forward. But I wasn't even allowed to say. So like if I said that when Fauci was saying don't wear a mask and I said you should, and that would have been me going against the sun. But now everybody can do it. That's what's driving me. Governor Newsom's Twitter feed isn't going to be taken down. His fucking YouTube page isn't going to be taken down. You could go against the CDC science now whenever you feel like it now. Why? Because Trump's not president?
Fauci lied about herd immunity as well.
Of course.
He basically made up a number and then changed it later on because he was afraid that, people wouldn't abide by the CDC guidelines if he put the number at a higher threshold. And the reality is I don't think the U.S. is going to reach herd immunity anytime soon. We're going to go from a pandemic to an endemic, which really isn't the worst result.
What is an endemic? What is that? What is an endemic?
It's like when COVID-19 becomes like the influenza or the flu, and it passes through seasonally. People don't die in such high numbers because many people have taken COVID-19 shots, and younger people are getting it who have not like 99.9% survivability rate. So it becomes like something that we can cope with. But getting to herd immunity, I mean, Fauci reset those numbers to something like 90%. And right now, like 50% of the public is taking the shot. And the sort of the coercive solution or response to that has been to blame people who are hesitant to take it, who are not in risk groups, who have very little chance of dying from COVID-19, to attack them, humiliate them, as we saw Jimmy Kimmel do. There was a New York Times op-ed, our pathetic failure to reach herd immunity. It's the people's fault. It's not the fault of our economic system, our government, or we can't think of this virus in a different way.
Or it couldn't be people's distrust of the liars like Fauci. Yeah. Maybe that had something to do with it. Hey, everybody, this is the part where I tell you where all our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then this is why I tell you to join our premium program and get extra content, but nobody's got a fucking job. So just enjoy the video.